say that the good life is the not self-ish life. So this is a life that is, whoa! Perfect. All right. This is amazingly perfect. It is the not selfish life, which ties into another way of saying this. It is the awakened life. In Buddhist philosophy, these are two ways of saying nearly the same thing. I'm going to explain this and then explain how this might apply to our work as human beings and as writers and as journalers, which is what the course is about. So the word Buddha is from the Sanskrit word root bud, which literally means to the awakened one. When the Buddha walked around in his time, he had such a different presence. I don't know if you've met people that just seem to be qualitatively and characteristically different from other people. The Buddha had this going on, and people asked him, "What are you? Are you a god?" And he said, "No." And they said, "Are you a man?" He said, "No." That's interesting. What are you? I'm awake. I'm awake. And what are we awake to? The reality of not self. So for another way of saying this, the good life is, and I'm going to use a Sanskrit word here, the good life is about shunyata, or emptiness. So this gets translated as emptiness, but it's a terrible definition, what that really, or a terrible translation. What it really technically is empty of an individually existing inherent self, this thing that exists no matter what. What this is really saying is this, we can say that this is empty fullness or not self. And I'm going to explain this a little bit deeper as it connects to, this is almost one and the same, or should be taken right along with this idea of interdependent arising. What does this mean? It means that anything I can point to or label, the pen cap, the pen, my thumb, my hand, my arm, my body. This gets interesting. Myself, what I would say is Sean Waters, is a subject of, is shunyata, is empty of its own existence and full of all of the conditions that give rise to it. Just here's the example that Thich Nhat Hanh uses. We could take a piece of paper. Here's one. Thich Nhat Hanh asks us, can you see the sunlight in this paper? Can you see the lumber workers in this paper? Can you see the rain and the conditions in the soil that gave rise to the trees, that gave rise to the ability for us to exist as human beings, the atmosphere, that gave rise to all of these other conditions that led to the fact that I'm holding a particular piece of paper right now? This paper is impermanent, and this paper would not exist without all the other conditions that gave rise to it. We could look at an example of lettuce as well. So you imagine lettuce growing in the garden. We see that and look at and say that this is lettuce. But lettuce only exists in relationship to a whole host of other conditions and factors that give rise to the lettuce. All of evolutionary theory, you could say, is this process of things arising in relationship to all of these different factors or conditions. So another way of saying this is that nothing exists on its own. The good life is the interconnected life. And Thich Nhat Hanh says inter-are, we inter-be, we inter-exist with all these other things. We get in trouble when we delusionally grasp after or push away things that are either that we want or that we don't want, all the while assuming or thinking by a mistaken of our cognition that this thing out there exists as we think it does, and we either want it or we don't, and we exist as this separate thing, that when I get this thing I will be happy, or when I avoid this thing I will be happy. And we're in this constant push and pull towards and against a whole host of situations that can be actually quite complex, and we can give, or we reify, we make them into things, into selves that exist independently out there that I want or I don't want. The good life in the path of the Buddhist path that the Buddha outlines is about a progressive lessening of the selfish grasping and delusion that keeps us basically chasing after mirages, what seems like an oasis but is actually empty of oasisness. It's just a condition, a play of light. Okay, so we went over the basic Buddhist metaphysics that says that everything we could point to, trees, lettuce, paper, human beings, are empty of an independently existing self and are full of all the conditions that give rise to that thing that appears as a self to us, and that interdependent arising, this impermanent process of all these factors coming together, giant systems giving rise to different conditions, that's basically the Buddhist metaphysic of what is actually real. And the good life is one that's awakened to this. What does this look like in practice? I think it's worth really basically going over this basic formula that the Buddha identifies delusion as. This is what we do not want, that leads to all kinds of unskillful, not good life behavior, but it forks into two different things, like I suggested. One of them is craving or grasping, and another one is aversion, or at its extreme, a kind of hatred, a pushing away. We want things that we think exist out there, and we don't want things. What happens, and this delusion is all linked to a notion of a self that's permanent, or at least permanent enough that it's going to last long enough for us to get what we want and stay away from what we do not want. Buddha says as long as we're engaged in this constant going for what we craving, greed, and aversion, we're going to be perpetually in this cycle of dis-ease. Dukkha gets translated as suffering, but it's actually a lot broader than suffering. Free-floating anxiety, like we're not quite, we're worried about the future, or depression, we're ruminating on the way things have been, and we're unhappy with what is arising right now. This is all a matter of, according to the Buddha, its roots are in this delusional misperception of the nature of reality. If we're going to live a good life, according to this philosophy, we're going to need to take the delusion and undo this. So instead of craving an aversion, we have insight into reality that leads to skillful means, or skill for action, where you can begin to cultivate the conditions that we can thrive and flourish under. What does that look like? If we are, instead of just the awakened life, isn't this thing out there that we're grasping at. It's a dynamic awareness of the constantly changing and impermanent phenomena that we are and that the world is. And we're going to see this, the best way to approach this is the 7 factors of the awakened life, or of awakening. And they are, number 1 is mindfulness. You can have mindfulness of the body, of our thoughts, and of our emotions. Those are the 3 foundations of mindfulness in traditional Buddhist philosophy. Our definition of mindfulness is the awareness of the present moment that is non-judgmental, that doesn't label things as good or bad. Here's an example. Let's just take an example of depression, which, if we're paying attention, and this is challenging because our language, depression, the word depression hints at that there is this thing out there called depression, and I, as a thing, either have it or I don't, or I kind of have it sometimes and kind of have it other times. Where in a more awakened vision of this, according to Buddhist philosophy again, depression is the arising, co-arising from a whole host of other factors. It in itself isn't anything, but it is a label that we apply to a certain host of conditions that lead to or don't lead to more or less of this thing that we call depression. It's kind of mind-blowing because this is undoing how we're thinking about language. And what happens? I get depressed about the arising of depression. There's this cycle that I'm getting depressed about depression, rather than being mindfully aware, noticing, there's depression arising at this point in time, and now I can be curious about it. What are the causes and conditions in this interdependent arising that are giving rise to that? Am I well fed enough? Am I well rested enough? Am I engaged socially with other people enough? And now I can start to really skillfully adjust to the arising of this state in a way that treats it as a not self. It's empty of itself, and so am I. The second factor is investigation. So if you're watching this and you're like, I don't know about all this, Sean, I'm curious, but I want to check it out for myself. That's great. It's one of the things I really respect about Buddhist philosophy, is that you don't need to take it on faith. The Buddha is very clear. In fact, his dying words, one translation of the dying words is, decay and disease are inherent in all things that change. So we need to really investigate or work out our own enlightenment, our own awakening with diligence. Ideally, this investigation, it's linked with this kind of curiosity and openness. And we are curious and open, one, about the nature of reality, and two, about the teachings themselves. We're not supposed to just trust these, we're supposed to investigate them and see what they say. Number three, I thought this is interesting, is energy. To actually have a certain amount of zest or the persistent ability, they said that a determined persistence to cultivate these qualities. It's really hard to cultivate mindfulness and to investigate reality if we don't have any energy, which means we need to, feed ourselves well and cultivate the energy that we have. Number four is joy. There's Sanskrit words for each of these. This is a feeling of well-being. It's kind of like just a general sense of it allows for this feeling of well-being, allows for more energy, which allows for us to keep practicing. Number five, tranquility. This is a kind of relaxation, calm. It's a nice complement to having energy. So we want to have a lot of energy, but we want to be calm and relaxed in how we use that energy so we don't burn out. 6 is concentration. Which is a sense of focused attention. So where mindfulness is like an open awareness of whatever arises, I can be mindful by being aware of the present moment without labeling it as good or bad. Concentration is like a spotlight on this one particular thing. So I might concentrate on the tip of this pen, and how long I can hold my concentration on that is different than being mindfully aware of the thoughts and emotions that are arising when I hold up the pen, or when I drop the pen, or when the whiteboard crashes down in the opening of the video. Number 7, equanimity. Now, I was interested that tranquility is kind of this peaceful restfulness. It seems connected to equanimity, but this equanimity is a non-attachment to what arises. So profound equanimity would be not preferring one state of affairs to another one. When something arises that we don't want, we're not attached. So a problematic situation arises, we're able to approach that problematic situation with the same kind of energy investigation as we would with a situation that's excellent. So we kind of have equanimity towards things that we want or don't want until we're more accepting and non-attached to the way things end up manifesting. These 7 factors, we can think of them as we're cultivating the conditions for an insight or awakening to happen. There's one other way I want to think about this that's mainly the simplest way that maybe we should have started with. This is maybe a little bit over our pay grade. And it's this. So we have these 7 factors of awakening. Another way of thinking about this, if I'm gardening or cultivating these different factors, we can look at these 4, translated as heavenly states, or 4 good, I'm just going to call them good states to be in. And these would be different ways of engaging in the world, and they are: 1, loving kindness; 2, we've already seen this one, equanimity; 3, compassion, literally means to be with another person's suffering; and 4, sympathetic joy, to be with another person's joy. These heavenly states are immeasurable states. We can say the 4 immeasurably good states because practicing them has an immeasurable benefit, not just to us or the persons that we are, but to everyone we engage with, to our relationships, to the field of dynamic arising that we're a part of. It's interesting that each of these imply a certain kind of not selfishness. When I'm loving kind, when I'm practicing lovingness and kindness to others, there is a real sense that it's not a selfish thing. Yes, it feels good to do it, but I'm not doing it for me, and I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for love itself in a certain regard. When I practice equanimity and I'm not judging what arises as good or bad, or I have a kind of non-attachment to what arises, and I'm embracing the challenge as well as what's great, that's also a kind of, it's not selfish. I'm not trying to grasp after certain things or avoid certain things. I'm taking my life as it comes and using each of those moments as they arise as abilities or opportunities to practice these practices. Same thing with compassion. I am with another person's suffering as if it were my own. I'm not being selfish about that. Same thing with sympathetic joy. This one doesn't get talked about enough, I don't think. I'm able to experience another person's joy as my own. I celebrate your joy. In fact, this is a really good marker of friendship, that good friends are the ones that you're able to celebrate your joys with, that don't hold your successes against you. Putting all of this together, in Buddhist philosophy, the good life is this constant practice of our tuning up and cultivating the conditions whereby we can more skillfully and with less delusion approach our lives to be good and do good in the world. It's less about securing happiness for myself, even though a lot of Buddhist programs are sold in this way. Even the Dalai Lama, one of the Dalai Lama's popular books is like, if you'd like to be more happy, practice Buddhism. And that's definitely true. So as we undo the causes of our negative emotions, we give space for the rising of more positive emotions that end up feeling good. We ascribe those positive emotions to happiness. But ultimately, the real good life here is one where it's almost like me as an independently existing self disappears. I no longer see myself as a self. I see myself as a arising of this astonishing array of conditions: cultural, social, psychological, emotional, interpersonal, intrapersonal. All these conditions are giving rise to what I label as Sean Waters. Now, there's one other thing, and this is the book I wanted to recommend for the psychologists. This is by Mark Epstein, MD, Psychotherapy from a Buddhist Perspective. The title is Thoughts Without a Thinker. When we say not self, this does not mean that the person doesn't exist. I exist. I have thoughts. You exist. You have thoughts. What this is rejecting is that I am radically separate from you and that you are radically separate from me, or that I am separate from all of the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are arising. And in fact, if I really investigate my experience, so says Buddhist philosophy and the Buddha, I'm going to see that there are thoughts happening. The thinker behind those thoughts that I might attach to, that I'm afraid to have die, that we maybe want to investigate that and see instead that we might be this constant stream of thoughts, emotions that are arising, and we have some agency to intentionally alter using these 4 states to practice cultivating. This word cultivate is huge, like a garden. We're cultivating the conditions for more loving kindness, more equanimity, more compassion, more sympathetic joy, so that we can more accurately awake to the reality of the situation, which is more interdependent and radically connected than we can maybe conceive, unless we're incredibly awakened and have achieved a qualitatively different state of awareness and engagement like the Buddha had. I'm curious, is this too much? Seems like it's too much to try to deal with an entire philosophy of the good life in what I hope would be a 10-minute video. I'm curious what of this was helpful, and I just say the last bit of this journey starts, at least in the context that we're doing this, in how we relate to ourselves in our writing as a practice of being aware of our thoughts and emotions, so we can practice mindfulness of our thoughts, not judging them as good or bad, being curious about them, investigating them, treating them with loving kindness, being compassionate to ourselves, experiencing joy of others and the experience that we have. And in that way, give ourselves the room to open up to the rest of the world. So we can be not selfish with ourselves, and we can be not selfish with the world and other people. And both of those things do end up connecting to each other in interesting ways. As we do this, I'm hoping that you can question or consider your own definitions of the good life, and hopefully question or consider parts of this that didn't seem to make sense or what you would like to go deeper into. If you like additional support and assistance, you can check out the links below. We're generating and creating a community of adults who are interested in living a more examined life, as what the goal of philosophy is, to be a lifelong friend of wisdom, which is, in our definition, our ability to make decisions that matter, that actually benefit ourselves in the world, to really live well. Thanks so much. Until next time, let me know. Thanks for subscribing and liking the video if you got something out of this, and we'll see you around. Bye-bye.